Freedom, an essentially essential concept, brought to you by me. In this video, we are going to try and answer a seemingly simple question: when, if ever, are limits on freedom necessary? This video will utilize the poems Caged Bird and Some Advice to Those Who Will Serve Time in Prison by Maya Angelou and Nazim Hikmet, respectively. If you're anything like me, and I hope for your sake you're not, the first image to come to mind when imagining the concept of freedom is something along the lines of this glorious masterpiece. While you could certainly argue that this is the type of freedom we should be referring to, it might be better if we go by the textbook definition. Freedom is defined as the power to act, speak, or think as one wants without hindrance or restraint. Using this definition, it is not that hard to assume that as law-abiding Americans, we don't really have as much freedom as we think. Think about it. We as a collective group make an unspoken deal with the government to follow the law in exchange for their protection and services. In this process, we have to give up some of our freedoms in order to allow for greater safety, i.e., why it's illegal to, let's say, go and murder your neighbor over a disagreement in cold blood. You can't do it legally, and the legal repercussions are the deterrent, such as prison and stuff. You could, of course, violate the law, but that would result in punishment. This is the way the government keeps everyone safe. That's not to say you don't have any freedoms. In the grand scheme of the whole world, personal freedoms in America look pretty Gucci compared to other places. These freedoms can be as minuscule or specific as, let's say, dyeing your hair a random color. What? Or as important and broad as freedom of speech, which, by the way, is a foreign concept in many countries, even Western ones. In a lot of places, criticizing the government or authority figures can get you locked up, and this is what I want to talk about. Not freedom of speech or anything, that stuff's lame. I want to talk about the prisoner, him or herself. More specifically, the prisoner's loss of freedoms. Because as I hope most of you know, detainees share only a fraction of the rights and privileges that you and I enjoy here in the U.S. First, we will look at the poem Caged Bird, and the story's not-so-subtle metaphor of the bird cage being the prison and the bird being the prisoner. Well, it's not so subtle. Lines like "the free bird thinks of another breeze" create a theme of longing to be free, something the prisoner is, not. The whole poem seems melancholy in tone, but the poem about nature, or more specifically, having it taken away, is pretty much the precedent. Now we can look at Some Advice to Those Who Will Serve Time in Prison. This poem is more like a warning than anything else. It's actually pretty metal at the beginning, comparing confinement to death, but worse. But transitions into a theme of patience, regret, and just a hint of depression. Being locked up for years at a time, as suggested in the poem, are bound to provoke these feelings, as just like Caged Bird, you are cut off from the outside world. However, unlike Caged Bird, there actually seems to be a hint of hope at the end, encouraging the reader, as if they were the convict, to think about the happy times ahead. So, does any of this actually help answer the original question in the context of the poems? While both stories portray those who lose their freedom as victims and almost make incarceration sound, unjust, they have failed to justify not using a prison system, as the reasons for imprisonment are not stated in either of the poems. The poems just imply that more freedom should be given to the confined. But why? The answer is pretty, I don't know. For example, the prisoner in the second poem suggests you may get locked up for 10 to 15 years. But not why. Oof. At least here in America, the government does not hand out these lengthy sentences because you like nature or something lame. You have committed a serious crime, something the poem seems unaware of. So while they may hope to, the poems offer no solution to this question. Womp womp.